Hello and welcome to our Adobe Illustrator course. Go to File, Menu and click New. In the Profile section we have an option to choose from these profiles. We can choose, for example, Print Profile or Web Profile for Internet documents. These profiles contain predefined values for this section of the New Document window. If we choose the Print Profile, the program will load standard A4 size 210mm by 297mm and set the page orientation to Portrait. We can choose how many pages a document will have. If we choose a higher number, the icons with page layouts will become active, so we have to set the layout by clicking this icon. The pages will go one by one from left to right. Let's click OK. Now we can clearly see how it looks. 4 pages set side by side. Let's create another document, but we will choose a different page layout. Let's try Grid by Column option. As you can see, the page layout is now different. If we now would want to edit one of these pages, we would need to click on, up here there's a little arrow. Click it and the toolbox will expand from one of the 2 rows. Let's go to Window menu. Here we have the option which, when active, will show us our toolbox. When we click it, the toolbox will disappear. If we click it again, the toolbox will appear again. This bar up here is very important for us. It's called the control bar or the property bar. Now, move your mouse to the toolbox and switch to 2 columns layout. Then, select Artboard tool. Once we click on this icon, we'll be able to edit our pages and move them to a different position. We can also change its format or orientation. Here, we can switch from Portrait to Landscape mode. To exit this Artboard tool mode, click on this icon with a black cursor. This tool is called Selection tool, and we can also switch to it by pressing V on our keyboard. Now we'll learn how to delete a page. Switch to Artboard tool by clicking right here on this icon. Then select the page and delete it by simply pressing the delete key on your keyboard. Of course, we can also modify the size of our page with the Artboard tool. We can change its size by dragging the transformation handles, or by changing this value right here. Let's exit the Artboard tool by switching to Selection tool. Now, close these 2 documents. Once the documents are closed, go to File and click on Open. Select the Start 1 file and press Enter. Press Ctrl+ and zoom in, and Ctrl- to zoom out. Let's zoom in. Hold the Control key and press a plus a couple of times. Press and hold space. A little hand will appear. Now we can scroll the document. So pressing space will change our cursor into a little hand. Press Ctrl and 0 to fit the page on our screen. We can also do that by going to View menu. Under Zoom in and Zoom out, we have the option called Fit Artboard in Window. Let's learn another way to zoom. Hold Ctrl and press space. Our cursor will change into a little magnifying glass. Now we can select the area we want to zoom, and the program will zoom in to our picture. Press Ctrl and 0 to fit the page on the screen. Again, hold Ctrl, press space, and select the area to zoom. There's one more way to do this. Go to Window menu and activate Navigator palette. We can zoom in by moving this little triangle on the navigation scroll bar. Now we can scroll the picture by dragging this little red rectangle. Reassuming, Navigator palette is just another way to zoom in and out. Close the Navigator palette and press Ctrl 0. Most of the time we'll use the Ctrl space shortcut to zoom. Let's try it again. Hold Ctrl and press space. Our cursor changed into a magnifying glass. Now we can select the area to zoom. To zoom out, press Ctrl-. Again, hold Ctrl, press space and draw a selection box. Now we can press space and move the visible area of our picture. That's the zoom technique we'll use. Of course, there's nothing stopping us from simply switching to Zoom tool and use it. Once we're using this tool, we can either click or draw a selection box to zoom in, To zoom out, press the Alt key. The sign on the magnifying glass will change from a plus to a minus. Now we can zoom out by either drawing a selection box or simply clicking the left mouse button. Just remember, to switch to the zoom in tool or zoom out tool, we need to hold Alt. So if you use the zoom tool, you can also use it to zoom. Press Ctrl 0. Here we can find the Documents tab. We can close our document by clicking this little X right here. Let's open another document and another one. Go to File, Menu and click on Open. Of course, at one point in our course we'll make these documents, but let's go back to the tabs. Each document is opened as a different tab. If we now open yet another document, it will simply appear next tab in the bar. We'll make each of these documents so you can now look at them to see what we'll learn during this course. The main idea behind this course is to learn how Illustrator works. It's the most important aim, which we'll pursue by making projects such as the ones you're seeing right now. Just like in Photoshop, we convert each of these tabs into a floating window. To ungroup the tab, drag it away from the tabs bar. To dock it on the tabs bar, just drag it and release the mouse button once your cursor is over the bar. Another way to do that is to click on the tabs bar with the right mouse button and choose the option Consolidate All to here. To convert all tabs into windows, go to Window menu, then Arrange and click on Float All in Windows. Now, all the documents are presented as separate windows. When we click on the document, it will come to the foreground. Now we can convert them to tabs by clicking on the tab bar with the right mouse button and then choosing the option Consolidate All to here. Before we can move on making our first project, in this case the logo, which you can see right here, we need to talk about a few more rules and options. Let's start with the screen modes. When we click on this icon, it will unveil and show us several different screen modes: normal screen mode, full screen mode with menu bar. We can choose whatever mode we want by simply clicking on it. We can also switch through different screen modes by pressing the F key repeatedly. Screen modes can make our work easier, so let's remember about them. Now, we'll learn how to undock the tools from the toolbox. As you can see, some of the tools have these small white triangles in the bottom right-hand corner. When we click on it with the right mouse button, nothing will happen. So let's click on it with the left mouse button. Now, hold the left mouse button. Move your cursor to this bar on the right and release the mouse button. The tool became separate. We've just undocked the pen tool. But let's try again with a different tool. Click, hold the mouse button and undock the Basic Shapes tool. Here we have a rectangle, round, rectangle, ellipse, polygon and star. Let's undock this tool here. It'll be useful as it contains eraser, scissors and knife tools. So now we know how to undock the tools from the toolbox. So let's revise this technique again. Click on the icon, hold the mouse button, move your cursor to the right bar and release the mouse button. Now, we know how to undock tools, and we've undocked 3 groups of tools: pen tools, eraser tools and shape tools. Let's now switch to Selection tool. When we move our mouse over the logo, the program will show us these prompts. Let's zoom in and position the document by holding space and dragging the document. As you can see, when we move our cursor over the various parts of the logo, these green prompts will appear next to it. What are they for? Go to View menu and look at the options in Smart Guides. To activate and deactivate it, we can also use the shortcut Ctrl and U. Most of the time, we will work with Smart Guides being activated. To see these guides better, we'll change their colour. To do that, we need to go to our document preferences. Click outside the document to deselect all objects. Up here, on the control bar next to the Document Setup button, there's a Preferences button. Another way to access them is go to Edit menu, then Preferences, and click on General. Let's look for Smart Guides on this list. Now, click on this option. In the Display Options section, there's an option to change the colour of the guides. Let's change it to black. Click OK. When we click on this button up here, the same window will appear. As you can see, now all the guides are black. So these prompts are called Smart Guides, and we can deactivate them by accessing the View menu. We've changed the guides colour to black because we'll use them a lot and it will be easier for us to see them. Let's click on this figure. As you can see, a bounding box has appeared round it. Well, let's draw a circle. Switch to Selection tool and click on the newly created figure. This is the colour of the bounding box. Don't confuse it with the Smart Guides with the bounding box. The colour of the bounding box is affected by the colour of the layer. Go to Window and click on Layers, or just press the F7 key. It's just like in Photoshop. F7 makes the Layers palette appear on our screen. F6 will show us the colour palette. F5 is responsible for the brushes palette. So, when we know all these shortcuts, we can easily make the wanted palette appear on the screen. This little bar right here is the colour of our layer. When we click this little triangle, we'll be shown all the sublayers. Let's click here. As you can see, every path is placed on a different sublayer. If we click this little circle next to the sublayer, the figure on the sublayer will be selected. When we collapse this list, this layer will be treated as a group of sublayers. When we click on the circle next to it, all elements of this group will be selected. Again, we can expand the list of this group by clicking on the triangle and select the layer contents by clicking on the circle. Let's collapse both of these sublayer lists. We'll be working only on this layer, layer 1. Now, let's click twice on layer 1. In this window, we can set the colour of our layer. Let's change it to red. Click OK. When we select the figure now, the bounding box will be red. So the colour of the layer indicates the colour of the bounding box. Maybe we can try to do something so that we can see it a little better. Create new layer by clicking on this small icon right here. Click twice on the newly created layer and let's choose some nice colour. Let's pick green. It should be more visible than the others. Click OK. Be sure that you're on layer 2 and then draw a polygon. As you can see, the colour is now different. Thanks to the colour of the bounding box, we can easily identify on which layer we currently are. So when we select it, like, the selection box doesn't have to include the whole figure to select it. It's enough if the selection box just touches the figure we want to select. Of course, it has its ups and downsides, but after all, it's a matter of getting used to it. Again, the circle has the red bound box because it's on layer 1. Another thing that's important is that when we select the figure, the program will automatically switch us to the layer containing the selected figure. When we select two objects, we will stay on the currently active layer. Let's now talk about the grouping objects in Illustrator. We'll also talk about it later, but now I'll just introduce the subject of grouping. Let's say that we want our objects to fit nicely on each other. We're working on a Flash project or a web project that we want our layer list to look nice and neat. What we need to remember is that if we group two objects from different layers by going to Object menu and clicking on Group, this won't be on both of these layers. The program will automatically move our group and both of these objects to one layer. We'll group objects so that we could edit them together. So scale them, make them bigger or smaller, move them or rotate them, but the group doesn't bind or weld combined figures together. Let's click on Group. As you can see, the colour of the bounding box has changed. That shows us that these objects were automatically moved to layer 2. Well, this can sometimes come in handy. For example, if we want to quickly move some objects to one layer, we just select them and group them. When we do that, all selected objects will automatically move into one layer. The downside is that we can't group objects from various layers and expect them to stay in the initial positions. Let's delete layer 2 by clicking on the recycle bin and press Ctrl 0. Let's talk about some more Illustrator rules. As you can see, this is not an ordinary palette, it's a group of palettes. We can ungroup the Artboards palette by clicking on it and dragging it outside this group. Now we have two separate palettes. We can move the palette by holding it here or here. We can group these two palettes together again. To do that, drag one palette and drop it onto the other. By clicking here, we can contract or expand the palette. We can also dock this group of palettes onto the left bar. One thing we have to remember is that if we move the palette here, like this, it will be a separate group of palettes. But if we move it like that and the other palette will become blue, two palettes or groups will merge into one. Last but not least, the most important palette element, Palette Menu. To access it, click, but before we do that, this button contracts and expands our palette, and when we click this little X, our palette will be closed. Let's go back to the Palette Menu. We can access it by clicking the small icon right here. This menu is very useful and it will help us more than once. It's an important part of not only Illustrator, but also of InDesign. Please remember about this menu because some of the options it contains aren't available anywhere else on the program. Some of the options from this menu are available here as icon shortcuts. So this is how the palette menu looks. Let's now activate the colour palette. Undock it from the left bar and move it here. Let's say that we like the way it looks now and we want to save the layout of our palettes and bars. Layouts or workspaces are available under the Essentials button right here. From this menu, we can choose from several predefined workspace looks. When we talk about workspace, we refer to how the whole window of our program looks like. Let's now click on New Workspace option. This option will allow us to save our current workspace. Let's name our workspace W1 and click OK. Let's now click on some of the default workspaces available here. We can choose the standard workspace called Essentials, or Painting Workspace, or Web Workspace. These are just predefined looks which we can apply to our workspace. Now we can click on W1 and the program will load our saved workspace. So, reassuming, workspace is the look or positioning of our palettes and bars. And we can, of course, save our workspace by clicking on the option called New Workspace.